Hi, welcome to another in the intermittent series Heart and Craft. I'm making a film called Heart of Neon about the independent artist Jeff Minter. And like all independent artists, Jeff's struggles are typical in that overcoming hurdles to get his art to the wider world. It's my hope through this series that if we, as independent artists, no matter what the discipline, can share our stories and our of how we've tackled these different obstacles, perhaps we can learn something from each other and maybe together figure a way forward that helps all of us. To that regard, I've been sitting on this interview for a while, so I apologize. Katherine Hamilton is, amongst many talents, a grant writer for filmmakers. This interview is somewhat adjunct to the interview I did with Peter Haas, in that Katherine is the person who helped Peter write a number of grants for his film project, and Katherine goes into an awful lot more detail about their experience and the process of being a grant writer and somebody who works on the other side of the grant process. So if you're a filmmaker, or indeed anybody who's seeking grants, this is for you. Take it away, Katherine Hamilton. Katherine Hamilton, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
This is my ongoing conversation about independent artists struggling in a capitalist world, and so I've known you for a little while, but perhaps for the viewers, you can give us some context. What is it you do, and why do you do it?
Sure. So I work in nonprofit operations. I come to that kind of through a non-traditional background. Originally, I have a degree in musical performance. I was a classical flutist and oboist. And then I also have a degree in music education. I was a teacher. I was preschool teacher for quite some time. And just in seeking career change, I ended up going into nonprofit operations, as I ended up in a symphony orchestra. And so that was a kind of a nice little slide in, because I have music background, and the director there, the executive director there, was just willing to give me a shot, because I had done some administrative work at schools I worked for. So now, after leaving the symphony, I work for a grant maker. So I went from the grantee side to the grant making side. Each kind of has their ups and downs, but at this point, I do a lot of financial stuff. I make spreadsheets, and I guess we know each other through Peter Haas, who I have worked with in writing grant proposals for his project, Lost in Heaven. So I can speak to, from my experience at the symphony and through experience with him writing a lot of proposals to grant makers.
So what was your first grant proposal?
With him, or just in general?
Just in general, yeah.
Oh, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs was the first application I ever worked on, which is a massive one. So I guess just to give you a little background on like grant making in general. So there are a lot of different kinds of grant makers. So like government funding. So going from like national to state to local. So for music, you have the NEA, which is National Endowment for the Arts. At the state level, in New York State, so the New York State Council on the Arts, or NISCA. And then in New York City is the Department of Cultural Affairs. So those are all government funders. You might have corporate funders, which are philanthropic organizations that are created and financially supported by a corporation, corporate. So that would be like the Ford Foundation, Morgan Stanley Foundation, Merck Foundation. Like these are all supported by corporations. And then you have just other general foundations, community, family, independent, and private. So community is like supported by the public. It's public charity. So and it's more focused on like small community. Family foundations are started by rich families. Independent foundations are a private foundation that is like not governed by a benefactor, a corporation, or anything like that. Usually endowments from a single source. And then private operating foundations, they operate on their own. They have their own charitable programs. They make grants. It's a legal classification with the IRS, and you're, as a private operating foundation, you're required to spend a portion of your assets every year on charitable activities. So private non-operating foundations are required to pay out like 5% or more of their assets. So just like general overview. So the very first grant proposal application I ever did was for a government organization, which is the Department of Cultural Affairs.
That's an overwhelming list.
Sorry, that was a buckshot of
No,
information.
but as an applicant, I mean, that's just daunting. I mean, how does one even approach that field? Is there an aggregator? Is there a central database? I mean, how do you start the search for? So I've got a project. Say it's like a music project. How does one go about funding a grant for that kind of thing?
Yeah, there are some like websites you can find that will have different lists of grant makers for like topic subject areas. One way to also is, once you find one, is you can maybe find others linked on their website, or if you look at an organization that's maybe doing something similar. So like when I worked for the symphony, it's a small symphony, we only had a $500,000 budget, which is very small, very tight. So sometimes we would get ideas by looking at, okay, so let's look at this other music organization, because big funders, you have to list them on your programs. You have to like essentially give credit and say thanks. So you can look at their programs and go, oh, here's some of their funders. So you can look at people doing similar things and get a list of funders from there. And then there are some people who do like consulting work on that too. So you can hire a grant writer, and they would have access to a network of maybe even a lot of the family foundations. It's hard to find them. So somebody who has connections in the space would probably be able to like leverage their connections to get you in with something like that.
That's what a grant writer is for.
Yeah, yeah, they write, they research, and usually they leverage connections and use their base knowledge. So like, for example, and Peter and I were working on stuff for Lost in Heaven. I have a certain amount of knowledge on like organizations that fund arts related things, because that's what I did. So kind of let me go down my list and look like, oh, is this foundation that I used to get grant money from at the symphony, are they doing anything for any other kinds of arts? So let's look at them. So it's like, yeah, just if I'm performing that role, leveraging content knowledge and your connections.
Grief. But so that does sound, though, that there's like a certain amount of detective work that's required for anybody.
Yeah, lots of detective work, lots of internet research and asking around, and like looking for places to apply. For the Lost in Heaven project, I had to do a lot more research on what kinds of organizations are giving money to films specifically. So kind of branching out from, okay, I know these general organizations that are doing stuff for music and other arts. Let me see if there's something happening in the world of film. So many hours of research and spreadsheets to track all of it in.
Right. Oh, no, I mean, it's Pete gave me a little insight into the process, and it did sound involved, and you're very organized, which helps.
Yeah, that helps.
I mean, it's still so, and it's pretty hit and miss, right? So like the number of people applying for grants, especially the big ones, must be huge.
Yeah, so the more money the grant is for, like let's say an organization is offering up to $50,000 per award, the more money there is, the more applicants you're going to have. It's going to be more competitive. And I think there was one that, and I'm not going to name any names because I don't want to, make any enemies. But
Fair enough.
There was one foundation that a lot of them will do informational webinars or info sessions on applying, especially if their application is complicated. And they'll walk you through some of the parts and give you the information on what exactly they're looking for. So there was one that I was sitting through their information session, and someone asked in the chat, like, what percentage of applicants are going to see an award. Like it's hard to suss these things out on like how much money are you going to give out, how many grants are they're going to be. But
Right.
they said, oh, typically like 5%. So, you know, if you have like 500 applicants, then very, very few of those are going to see any money for something large. For smaller ones, those organizations might give out, like if it's $500 or $250, I think we applied for some that were less than $1,000. They're a little bit more willing to kind of float funds to more applicants, but then the competition isn't going to be as fierce because everybody wants to get those like bigger payouts because
Right.
it's more for your project.
Right, it's one-stop shop too. It's probably like one grant will probably do you, rather than like trying to piece together a bunch or different funding. I mean, that's just the reality of it. It's trying to find money from different places. But if you get one of these smaller grants, one of these things that somebody told me, I think it was somebody who was working in what do you call it? When you an organization that they hold money for you. What on earth is that called again?
A
Fiscal sponsor.
Fiscal sponsor.
Somebody's working as fiscal sponsor, and they were saying I should apply for grants because if you get one grant, it's sort of like a validating ticket, and it is easier to get other money. Do you see that as being true, or was that an exaggeration?
Yeah, absolutely true. As an applicant and also on the grant making end of things. So like as an applicant, for sure, if you have some grants to list, then when you list your budget out, then you can say, well, we've leveraged funds from this one, this one, this one, and we're applying for funds from this one, this one. So if the more that you have already, then it makes your project into more of a sure thing. So in grant making, a lot of what they're looking for are probably the same as if you had to pitch it to a studio, deliverables. So they want to make sure that your project is actually going to happen. It's going to be out there and that their name is going to be on it. Even the organization I work for, we don't give out grants in film. It's more for like research and things like that, but they're still looking for deliverables. Like, did you service the number of clients that you said you would? Did you put out as many publications as you said you would? So what the organizations are doing is they're looking at you, the applicant, and saying, okay, this project likely to happen? Are we likely to see those deliverables that we're going to get to put our name on? So if you've already leveraged funds, then it's like, oh, well, you know, like Paul already has $50,000 from this organization to make this movie. That makes it more likely this movie's going to happen. So we'll give money too. So having one grant is really helpful to get more. And it's the snake eating its own tail of like, you need money. You need someone to give you a grant in order for someone to give you a grant. But it just becomes a problem when you have projects that are in really, really early stages that you don't have as much to show for, or you don't have enough funding for it. It gets hard.
Well, that's sort of why there's so many grant opportunities, because some people focus on different parts of the process. I mean, I didn't look into grants until late in the process for Heart of Neon, and I was looking at finishing funds, and it's still, you know, not everybody wants to be involved in the project. Like, if they're having their name on the project, it needs to reflect their values. It's something I didn't necessarily understand at the time. I mean, if you were to give advice to somebody putting a grant together, how do you think people should prepare for it?
Oh, so for preparing for it, you definitely want to have a really, really, really good idea of what your project is, what you want to accomplish. So like that's one of the pros of going through the like grant writing process and applying to a bunch of different places, is that you have to learn to be concise. You have to know exactly who you are and what your point of view is and what your project is, because you're going to need to describe it in like 17 different ways, and probably with a word count lower than you want. Probably with a limit that is more extreme than you want. So yeah, definitely knowing exactly what your point of view is, what exactly you want to do. And I guess one of the cons of that too is that when you are writing for a grant, you need to take into account what the grant maker is looking for, and that might mean that you need to either shift your focus or reframe it. And that is a way that they have a large amount of influence on the final product, because you might have to reframe or change the point of view a little bit in order to align with their values. So it's also important to look at, like, does this grant maker's values align with my values? Am I what they are looking for? Because, like, let's not waste both our time, you know?
It's just the last few months I've realized trying to figure out who I could realistically partner with has focused my attention on what the project's about. Like, I made the film. The film was already basically finished, but I didn't know what it was about. You know, it's that thing. Like, what can I align with? Like, my film is about, you know, an independent game developer. It's about the history of, like, this genre, and it's about self-starting programmers who pull themselves up by the bootstraps. And those are three things I was able to, once I figured them out, was able to target different groups. And that's not, as a filmmaker, it's not what I do. I mean, and even a kind of music project, how is that the same kind of thing? Can there be larger goals for musical projects?
Oh, yeah. So I guess as an example, the orchestra I was working for, we had a couple of different programs, and we were actively trying to start a new program when I was there. And it was tough, because one of the programs that we had was a series for New York City school children. It's a competition thing. It's a national thing called Music Memory, that is, like, teaching kids how to essentially do style analysis, like classical music style analysis, which is pretty rad. And then we would have a culminating event where it would be a competition, and kids would come from all over the city. We'd have a live orchestra, essentially doing a drop the needle test, is what that was called when I was in music school, where you drop the needle on a track, and they have to tell you, who is this? Like, what composer is this? And what work is this? And they've been awesome. Learning these works throughout the year so they can identify them. And it might be a different instrumentation. It might be a different arrangement. It might be like a couple of notes. So we had that program, and we wanted to start a new program to do children's concerts, like a children's concert series, and kind of dovetail with that. So the great thing about the Music Memory Project was that it was very focused. This is the goal, is to teach kids to be able to, like, identify classical music pieces, but also to, like, increase their appreciation for it, and to help a new generation to appreciate classical music. The children's concerts became difficult because, like, working with my boss at the time to try and refine that idea, you do have to kind of think about, what is this for? What are you trying to do? And he would kind of get frustrated and say, like, well, it's to put on children's concerts. Of course, but what are we trying to do? wait.
To what end, right?
Yeah, to what end? Like, are we trying to, increase, like, kids going to classical concerts in general? Are we trying to make it into a, like, kids and parents together enjoying it? Like, what is our end goal? And I think that's part of why that project kind of got stopped over and over again, is because we couldn't find a good way to have an identity for the project other than, like, put on a concert for children. You need to have a more refined idea of what you're doing.
Well, there needs to be a metric, right? That's how you know that the person applying for the grant has reached success. So there has to be some measure. What will be different once this project is in the world, right?
Yeah, and it could be something as simple as, like, 1,000 kids in New York City got to see a concert who wouldn't have normally gotten to see a concert. So then maybe your focus is more like, we're going to go into more low-income areas, or, like, we're going to go into the outer boroughs because there's not as much in classical music in the outer boroughs. Like, trying to find out, like, what metric are you trying to hit? Because it is, again, deliverables. Right. You need to show something at the end.
I mean, the difference for me, so, this time last year, I just saw grants as a way of getting cash. And now I understand it better as, like, it's trying to create impact. Each grant is trying to create a different kind of impact. And if you think about your project as having eventually having impact rather than just being a thing in the world, it makes it easier to marry those your goals and their goals up and seeing where the overlap is. But I'd never thought of that before. It never even
Yeah.
occurred to me. It's like, it's just money, right? You're just going to give me a check and I'm going to make this thing because, art is beautiful. But that's not the case. It's
But
sort of transactional, but for an outcome that affects a larger proportion of the population than just the grant makers, right?
yeah, because the grant maker, their benefit is going to be that they get to slap their name on something at the end. But of course, that's not, if you look at any foundation, that's not going to be the mission statement on their website. Is not going to be to slap our name onto things. It's going to be to make some kind of impact. So, if you're applying to a foundation that it wants to help science fiction films, like shorts, to be made, then that's their mission, is we want to see more of these movies made, and we want like more short science fiction films to reach more people, and so like they're gonna have a mission that they want to adhere to.
Does that exist?
I don't think so.
What a wonderful grant that would be.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing. I don't think that does exist. I think most of them, a lot of the grants that I ran into and looking in filmmaking, a lot of them were for finishing funds. It was really hard to find anyone who really wanted to help with the early stages. They wanted to see that you
Right.
kind of put your own cash in there somewhere first.
I mean, there's that the whole thing about having a track record too, and basically anything that can show potential funders that you can finish is going to be a benefit. I mean, that's because from the thing about filmmaking, I guess it's easier to make like an issues-based documentary and get funding that way than it would be to create like what would a narrative have any benefit. It's harder to position a narrative as a thing unless it's about an issue. It's a dramatization of an issue rather than like a straight up documentary. I mean, it's I don't know. It's tricky, and that'd be the same thing would be for writing. The same thing would be for any creative outlet that's not specifically documenting a cause. It's overlapping needs, right?
Yeah, it's tough.
I mean, let's talk about your interaction with it. I mean, what's from the grant providing perspective? What's the hardest thing for you?
I think the hardest is the projects that don't get funded. That's, I think, the hardest. I don't necessarily have I don't have any say in the projects that do or don't get funded because I'm not a program person. I'm the ops person, but I do also read all of the proposals. I'm the one importing them into our grants management software. And so in reading through them, I get to see a lot of interesting ideas and a lot of really cool things that like they vibe with me, they resonate with me. So it's really hard to see them not get put through to the next stage because they're not what the program officers are looking for. That's really hard. I think also in the like I usually perform the financial due diligence process, which is looking at the finances of the organization that's applying. Now, if you're applying as an individual, a lot of the grant makers will want a fiscal sponsor. So they would be looking into the financial situation of the fiscal sponsor. But looking into the finances involves looking at like audited financial statements, the like nonprofit tax return, which is the 990. So looking at 990s, looking at their budget, looking at their personnel, looking at who sits on their board of directors, if they have a board of directors, it's doing a lot of research. So also seeing some of the organizations not get past that stage too, because there's like something that pops up when you look into it. It's like, whoa, that project's a really good one, but I found this thing. And so that's hard.
Yikes. That's as an independent creative, it's intimidating as heck. The financial paperwork. I mean, because there are in my field there are organizations that will take on the fiscal sponsorship responsibility. IFP, now called the Gotham, has fiscal sponsorship. I believe Brooklyn Film Shop has one too, or certainly can connect you to them. Film Collective has one, and there's a Film Collective people that I were talking to. So that for small filmmakers, certainly there seems to be organizations that will help you with that piece, but you still have to have a budget together. You still have to some kind of fiscal organization, which it doesn't come naturally to me. I mean, when I went to Rockport Film Academy, and they had this presentation by this professional photographer, and she said, your team needs to include is a lawyer and an accountant.
Yeah.
And the rest is just a lot of sweat equity, and the more time I spend trying to do what I do, it's like, oh yeah, that's probably a good idea, isn't it? I've got the attorney, I still don't have an accountant, and but that's the kind of stuff that when you're becoming an artist you don't really think about, and there aren't really that many places turning around and telling you, yeah, you need to get your business part in order.
Yeah, I don't think that comes up very much, or at least when I was in music school, they didn't really talk about that. The only person I had, only teacher that I had who talked about, yeah, you really need to get an accountant was he was a cellist, and he did a lot of gigging, and he said, listen, you're going to need a good accountant to help you. You're going to need a tax guy. But he was the only one who really was like, no, you have to have your financial house in order. And yeah, if you're applying to fiscal sponsorship, you do kind of need to have your financial house in order. I noticed that you kind of already have to have a grant award in order for them to talk to you. And then and then there are some grants that won't award unless you have a fiscal sponsor. So it's that snake eating its own tail again. And then you also have to keep in mind that the fiscal sponsor is they're going to take a cut. So it does cost money.
So, say someone does successfully navigate the fiscal part and the paperwork part, and they find a match and they get a grant. How are grants dispersed? Is it like the lottery? You could get a lump sum or dispersed over time, or are the conditions in each grant that are different? Is that?
Yeah, a lot of places do it different ways. So there were some organizations I worked with at the symphony that they would just send you a check. Here's your $25,000. Boom. Cool. But a lot of organizations will do percentage disbursements. And in particular, if the grant is for multiple years. So if it's a 2-year term on this grant, then they'll disperse throughout. The Department of Cultural Affairs, they will disperse more of it up front, and then you don't get the rest until after you've submitted your final report to them. So you don't get the rest until you show them the deliverables, essentially. So the organization I work for also reserves the last 10% of the award for after you've done your final reporting. You've had one last call with your program officer, and then when they are satisfied, then they'll pay that out. Sometimes there's a thing that could happen if you haven't quite hit your mark yet. Some organizations will offer you an extension on the terms. I don't have my deliverables yet, but soon, so they'll offer an extension. But still, a lot of organizations will keep that last 10% for after it's done.
No, that makes sense. That's typical contract negotiation. Doesn't sound that crazy, especially for large sums and long-term projects.
Oh yeah.
They don't want to be left there with nothing.
Yeah.
And this is all taxable, right?
No.
If you get a grant, do you pay taxes on it?
No. Well, if a nonprofit pays no taxes on it. So if you're using a fiscal sponsor, then usually if they have their 501, then they wouldn't be paying taxes on it. Grant making is not, grants are not usually taxable income, which is cool. I'm not sure how that works on the individual level, receiving a grant as an individual. That was something that was on the to-do list for if we managed to get funds for Lost in Heaven, what that would look like. So we kind of didn't get quite to that stage. But as when I worked at the Symphony is a nonprofit, so it's not taxable income. And the organization I work for now, if we received a grant, it wouldn't be taxable income. The only thing that nonprofits pay taxes on, well, they pay the like employment taxes for having employees, but also you pay taxes on your earnings for the endowment.
Right. So going back to Pete's project, I mean, how long did you engage with the grant process before you decided it's time to draw a line under that?
I think we went.
Because you looked for a while, right?
We did. So it was a good 18 months to 2 years worth of writing. Just kind of, we would finish one and then start the next, and finish one and start the next. And before you know it, like a year had gone by of doing that. And that was in part due to just the cycles of how applications would be open. So we would flag things. Oh, this one is open in November. It's July, so I have it flagged for November. So we're just kind of doing this on a rolling basis. So yeah, we worked on it for a while, but I think when we decided to pull the plug was when we started to get the rejection letters back. Like, oh, we applied for this like 18 months ago, and now we're hearing back. Like, maybe it's time to like set it aside for now. I don't like to say, I wouldn't say that we've set it aside forever. I think we just set it aside for a time to work on other stuff and build up more steam. I think also Adam Curtis releasing his QAnon-centric film also kind of, and when we were watching it together, I think we had just channeled his style of delivery. He inhabited our bodies while we were writing, and the first couple lines of his movie, the opening monologues just sounded very like, uh-oh. We'd have to like do a lot of rewriting of what we had and reframing, and that's, I guess, just part of it happens.
Right. What would have made that different? What do you think Peter and maybe yourself could have done that would have changed those circumstances? I think Pete thought that there wasn't enough to show.
Yeah, I think if we had talked about this, like, oh gosh, we've talked about this at length on many occasions and what we could have done differently. But something we came up with was maybe if like he had cut something together, just like an example, like a couple of minutes worth of something that we could show as like, this is what we're aiming for. Because it made it hard because we didn't have anything already cut, already filmed. That might have helped to just have something small that we could show besides just the treatment that we had done. I think also there were a couple of applications that when I got the rejection and the feedback, I was like, crap, I probably should have known better. There was one in particular, the organization, you write one sentence and it's $10,000 and you have one sentence to convince them.
That sounds like some cruel joke. Like it's just a test.
It was really rough.
Ha ha! How can we dangle it in front of the poor people? Ha ha ha! Write a good sentence.
Yeah, dance for us. So that was really hard. Like we agonized over this single sentence for so long. But then, like when we got the rejection and I was looking at the feedback, I was like, wait, so they wanted to know a little bit more about how the funds would be used. And that is part of applying is generally you'd say how the funds will be used. And the language that's pretty typical to use is funds will be used to leverage additional funds, to defray the costs of editing or archival footage or anything like that. But it was tough, like, how do we put this in a single sentence where we also are describing the project? But then I went back and looked at the materials because we had copied everything into, like, a Google Doc, and we had, like, a pretty high word count that we could have used. I'm like, oh, so one massive run-on sentence would have also been acceptable. So I wish we had written a bigger run-on sentence that said Lost in Heaven is, and we're planning to use the funds too, and we are. Like just a really long sentence. So that there was a lot of that kind of regret of certain applications that like if I had looked at it more closely and maybe caught something like that earlier. Yeah, definitely having just even something cut together that we could have used as like an example of we want to do this would have been helpful.
From my end, it looks like my video is messing up. I don't know what's going on. Is my video jerking around?
A little bit when you move. Yeah. A little
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm gonna quit while I'm ahead.
Well,
Well, I mean, this has been an very informative, very insightful. It does sound like a lot of hoops to jump through, but the rewards are massive.
yeah.
I mean,
No.
not just financially, but in terms of like credibility and access.
Absolutely. If you can leverage a grant, then that gives you credibility to in the next application. You can show that someone else believes in me too. And that's really, really valuable in the process. And grant makers are going to look at what other monies do you have coming in. So, yeah, I can't say enough that it's so important to get that first one. It's just so difficult to get that first one.
Yikes. Kat Hamilton, thank you very much.
Thank you.